My name is Shelby, and I am 27 years old. I still remember the exact tone of my father's voice that night. The way it cut through the laughter and clinking, glasses like a blade disguised as a joke. The house was full, warm with yellow light and crowded with relatives, neighbors and family friends who had watched me grow up, people who once pinched my cheeks and told me I was such a bright child. It was my birthday, a day that was supposed to be about celebration, about feeling seen, about belonging. Instead, it became the night that rewrote the entire story of my life. We were gathered around the dining table, candles flickering on a cake I barely had the appetite to look at. My cousins were recording videos, my aunt was smiling too widely, and my mother was busy pretending everything was perfect, as she always did. Then it happened. My dad put down his glass, turned to me slowly, and the room, as if sensing something, grew quiet. He looked straight into my eyes with a coldness I had never seen so openly before and said, "Word for word, I wish you were never born." For a second, nobody reacted. The sentence hung in the air, unreal, like a line from a cruel play. A few nervous chuckles followed, the kind people use to mask discomfort, assuming it had to be humor. Because what father would say that to his daughter on her birthday? But I knew. I saw it in his face. There was no joke there, no exaggeration, no drunken slip. Just resentment, years of it, finally spoken without restraint. Something inside me shattered in that moment. Not loudly, not dramatically, but with a silent, irreversible crack. My chest tightened, my ears rang, and yet I stood there frozen, smiling weakly like an obedient character in a scene I had not agreed to perform. No one defended me. No one told him to stop. My mother looked away, my relatives stared at their plates, and I understood something devastating. This was not a sudden outburst. This was how he had always felt. All the small comments, the comparisons, the disappointment disguised as advice. The constant reminder that I was never quite enough. They all aligned into one brutal truth. That night I didn't argue or cry. I didn't give anyone the satisfaction of a breakdown. I went to my room, closed the door gently, and sat in the dark replaying his words again and again, each repetition burning deeper than the last. Sleep never came. By morning, the pain had transformed into something colder, clearer, almost surgical. The next morning I didn't argue or cry. I packed my bags, withdrew my savings, found a new place, disappeared without looking back. There was no dramatic goodbye, no confrontation, no note. Just the quiet sound of a suitcase, rolling across the floor of the house that had never truly felt like home. As I stepped outside, the early sunlight felt strange, as if I were walking into a life that had been waiting for me all along. I didn't know exactly what came next, but for the first time, I knew what would not. I would not spend another year begging for approval from a man who regretted my existence. The words, "I wish you were never born," echoed in my mind. But instead of breaking me, they began to harden into resolve. If my own father could erase me so easily with a sentence, then I could rebuild myself just as decisively with a choice. What he didn't realize, what none of them realized, was that his words had not destroyed me. They had set something in motion, and he had absolutely no idea what came next. The first weeks after I left were terrifying. Freedom is often romanticized, but no one talks about the fear that comes with cutting yourself loose from everything familiar. I moved into a tiny apartment with peeling paint, a stubborn lock, and windows that rattled when buses passed by. It wasn't glamorous, but it was mine. No judgmental glances, no suffocating tension, no father whose disappointment filled every corner of the room. For the first time, I could breathe without feeling like I owed someone an apology for existing. I threw myself into work, taking extra shifts, saying yes to every opportunity, determined to build something no one could take credit for or tear down with a sentence. Days blurred into nights, and slowly, the pain that once felt unbearable transformed into fuel. Every memory of that birthday, every replay of his voice saying, "I wish you were never born," became a quiet challenge I carried with me. I would prove, not to him, but to myself, that my life had value independent of his approval. Months passed, then a year, then another. I changed jobs, climbed positions, learned skills I never imagined I possessed. Confidence, once fragile, began to settle into something solid. I built routines, friendships, a version of myself untouched by my family's expectations. And yet, despite everything, a small part of me believed my disappearance would eventually trigger reflection, maybe even regret. I thought my absence might force my father to confront the weight of his words. I was wrong. The call came on an ordinary afternoon, the kind of day that gives no warning before altering everything. My phone buzzed with a number I hadn't seen since the morning I left. I stared at the screen, my pulse quickening. For a moment, I considered ignoring it. But curiosity, or perhaps destiny, made the decision for me. My mother's voice was shaky, stripped of its usual composure. My father, the same man who once declared he wished I had never been born, was in trouble. Serious trouble. Financially ruined after a series of reckless decisions. Betrayed by people he trusted. Drowning in consequences he never anticipated. The confident, untouchable patriarch had fallen, and suddenly, the daughter he had dismissed became relevant again. There was something almost surreal about the irony. The man who had treated me like a lifelong mistake now needed the very person he had tried to emotionally erase. But the true shock was not his downfall. It was what came next. He didn't apologize. He didn't acknowledge the past. The message, carefully wrapped in urgency, carried an unspoken expectation that I would step back into the role of the dutiful daughter, that blood ties would override memory, that years of pain could be conveniently forgotten. In that moment, I felt no triumph, no satisfaction, only a strange, aching clarity. Revenge had always seemed like the natural conclusion to stories like mine. But reality is more complicated. I had spent years rebuilding myself, forging an identity beyond his shadow. Going back, even emotionally, felt like undoing everything I had fought to become. And yet, despite the hurt, I was not cruel. I listened. I asked questions. I understood the situation. But I also understood something far more important. Helping someone does not require surrendering your dignity. I set boundaries, and firm, unshakable boundaries that the old Shelby would never have dared to speak. There would be no rewriting of history, no pretending his words hadn't fractured something fundamental. If he wanted my help, it would exist within the reality of what he had done, not the fantasy of a past conveniently erased. For the first time in my life, the balance of power had shifted. Not because I sought revenge, but because I had finally recognized my worth. The greatest twist in my story was not his collapse, but my indifference to his validation. The sentence that once broke me, "I wish you were never born," had lost its power completely. I was no longer the girl silently absorbing humiliation at a birthday table. I was a woman who had built her life from the ruins of that night. And standing there, phone in hand, hearing the consequences of a man who never imagined I could walk away, I realized the truth he had never seen coming. My disappearance was not an act of weakness or drama. It was the beginning of a life he could neither control nor comprehend. He had no idea what came next when he spoke those words. And now, finally, he understood, too late, that the daughter he wished away had become someone he could never diminish again. If my journey resonated with you, if you believe in rising after being underestimated, remember to subscribe to the channel for more powerful stories that remind us all of the strength we forget we have.